Monday morning, 6:47 a.m. She had two choices: board that flight and disappear forever, or trust a stranger with a secret that could destroy a powerful man. Her neck brace hid the truth. Her phone held the evidence. And the CEO who attacked her was 50 feet away, watching. Then she saw the uniform, the medals, the posture of her father's brothers in arms. She made a decision her father taught her, one silent gesture that would set off a chain reaction nobody saw coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. She wasn't supposed to be alive. Monday morning, Gate 47 at Dallas-Fort Worth International. The terminal hummed with the exhausted energy of early travelers. Businessmen clutching coffee like lifelines, families herding sleepy children toward security, the constant drone of departure announcements echoing through the corridors. People moved with purpose, destinations locked in their minds, oblivious to the woman in blue nurse scrubs who'd stopped breathing the moment she sat down. Her name was Sabrina Mitchell, and every cell in her body screamed that she'd made a terrible mistake. The white neck brace stood out stark against her pale skin, medical-grade foam that couldn't quite hide the purple shadows creeping above the collar. Her scrubs were rumpled from a sleepless night spent on her apartment floor, too afraid to lie in bed where she couldn't see the door. Dark circles hollowed out the space beneath her eyes that hadn't closed for more than 20 minutes at a time in 72 hours. Her hands gripped her phone with such force that her knuckles had gone bloodless, refreshing the same email over and over, looking for some sign that the threat had passed. It never did. She'd been sitting there for 11 minutes, watching the gate area fill with strangers, searching every face for the one she was running from. A man in a gray suit walked past, and her breath caught. Not him. A businessman laughed into his phone nearby, and her spine went rigid. Not him either. She was trapped in a cage of her own paranoia, unable to tell the difference between danger and shadow anymore. That's when she saw the Admiral. He entered from the west corridor, moving with the kind of unhurried confidence that only comes from decades of command. Navy dress blues, perfectly pressed, the jacket adorned with rows of ribbons that told stories of service she could only imagine. Silver hair, cropped military short. Shoulders squared despite what had to be at least 65 years on this earth. He carried himself like a man who'd spent his life making decisions that mattered, bearing the weight of other people's lives without complaint. He found a seat 3 down from her, set down a leather briefcase worn soft with age, and opened a newspaper, the actual paper kind, not a phone screen. She watched him from her peripheral vision, careful not to stare. There was something in the set of his jaw, the quiet authority in the way he turned pages, that reached into the hollow place her father's death had carved out 15 years ago. He looks like Dad, she thought. Same shoulders, same quiet strength. Her father had been a Navy SEAL, a man who moved through the world like deep water, calm on the surface, powerful beneath. He'd taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice you made when fear was all you had left. He'd taught her to stay steady when everything fell apart. And he'd taught her one other thing, a small gesture she'd never imagined needing, a hand signal that meant I need help, but I can't say it out loud. She looked at the Admiral and felt something crack open in her chest. Not quite hope, but maybe it's possibility. But to understand why she was about to risk everything on a stranger, we need to go back 3 weeks. To the night she discovered her hospital was hiding something far darker than medical errors. Her father taught her that courage isn't loud. It's the quiet choice you make when no one's watching. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, Navy SEAL Team 3. 23 years of service. A man who could disappear into shadows and move through enemy territory like smoke, but who sang off-key in the kitchen every Sunday morning while making pancakes. He never talked about the missions, never wore his uniform unless he had to, never needed the world to know what he'd done. Heroism, he told her once, wasn't about glory. It was about showing up when it mattered, doing what needed to be done, and going home to the people you loved. Sabrina was 17 when he taught her the signal. They were in the backyard of their base housing in Virginia Beach, late summer evening, fireflies just starting to blink in the dusk. He'd been teaching her self-defense, basic stuff, he said, things every woman should know. But then he stopped, got quiet in that way he did when something serious needed saying. Sabrina, listen to me, he'd said, crouching down so they were eye level even though she was nearly grown. There might come a time when you're in danger and you can't speak. Maybe someone's listening. Maybe they've threatened you. Maybe you're just so scared the words won't come. He'd taken her hand then, positioning her fingers in a specific way, subtle, deliberate, nothing that would draw attention from across a room, but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. If you're ever in that situation and you see someone like me, military, law enforcement, someone who's been trained, you make this signal. Only people like me will know what it means. It means, I need help, but I can't say it out loud. You understand? She'd nodded, practicing the gesture until he was satisfied. Then he'd pulled her into a hug that smelled like Old Spice and summer grass and safety. I hope you never need it, he'd whispered into her hair. But if you do, I need to know you'll use it. Promise me. She promised. 2 years later, she was in her second year of nursing school when the chaplain came to her dorm room. Training accident, they said. Helicopter went down during a night exercise off the coast of North Carolina. He'd stayed at the controls long enough for his team to jump clear. Went down with the bird. Saved 7 men. Died doing what he'd always done, putting others first. She'd stood at his funeral in her nursing school scrubs because she didn't own anything black that fit anymore. Surrounded by men in dress uniforms she didn't know, listening to them tell stories about a version of her father she'd only glimpsed in pieces. A hero, they called him. A warrior. A brother. But to her, he was just Dad. The man who taught her that saving lives didn't require speeches or medals. It required showing up, staying calm, and doing the work nobody else wanted to do. She became a nurse to honor that. He'd saved lives in silence, in places whose names were still classified. She wanted to do the same, just in hospital corridors instead of war zones. She kept that signal in her heart, like a promise. She never imagined she'd need it against someone wearing a suit instead of camouflage. If you've ever lost someone who taught you to be brave, hit that subscribe button. This story is for people who understand that kind of legacy. For 3 years, she believed she was making a difference. Then she walked past the CEO's office at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Memorial Grace Hospital sat on the east side of Fort Worth like a promise kept. 8 stories of glass and brick, founded in 1947 by a coalition of churches who believed healthcare was a moral obligation, not a business opportunity. The lobby still had the original stained glass window depicting the Good Samaritan, and every December, the staff decorated a 20-foot tree in the atrium that patients could see from their windows. It was the kind of place where doctors knew their patients' grandchildren by name, where nurses brought homemade soup when someone was struggling, where the mission statement carved into the cornerstone wasn't just words, to serve with excellence, compassion, and integrity. Sabrina had loved working there from her very first shift. She was good at her job, the kind of good that didn't need announcing. Patients asked for her by name. Families hugged her in hallways, thanking her for sitting with their dying father when they couldn't get there in time, for advocating with doctors when pain medications weren't working, for remembering that Mrs. Chun in 412 was terrified of needles and needed her hand held during every blood draw. Her co-workers respected her. The attending physicians trusted her clinical judgment. She'd been nominated for the Daisy Award twice, that recognition nurses give each other when someone goes above and beyond. She wasn't just doing a job. She was honoring her father's memory with every shift, every patient, every quiet moment of competence that saved a life or eased suffering. The hospital itself felt like an extension of that mission. Memorial Grace had a reputation. Good outcomes, low infection rates, a level 2 trauma center that served 3 counties. When the local news did stories about healthcare excellence, they filmed in Memorial Grace's cardiac unit. When medical students ranked their residency preferences, Memorial Grace was always in the top 5. The board of directors was made up of community leaders, retired physicians, pastors, and business people who genuinely seemed to care about the institution's legacy. And then there was Richard Hendricks, the CEO. He'd arrived 18 months earlier, recruited from a major hospital system in Chicago with promises of modernization and financial sustainability. Mid-50s, silver-haired, expensive suits that somehow made everyone else look rumpled by comparison. He had the kind of charisma that filled boardrooms, confident, articulate, the sort of man who could quote both scripture and quarterly earnings in the same sentence. At town halls, he talked about excellence in patient care and stewardship of community trust. Nurses liked him because he remembered names. Doctors respected him because he'd supposedly been a paramedic before getting his MBA, so he understood the clinical side. Sabrina had met him twice. Once during orientation, when he'd shaken her hand and said something about being glad to have dedicated professionals like her on the team. Once in an elevator, when he'd asked about her father's Navy portrait pin on her scrub jacket and thanked him for his service. He seemed fine, normal, maybe a little too polished, but that was CEO territory. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday night in late September. Sabrina was covering a double shift. Her coworker's kid was sick, and the unit was short-staffed. Around 11 p.m., after medications were distributed and most patients were settled, she headed toward the administrative wing to drop off some paperwork that needed the nurse manager's signature. The hallways were quiet, fluorescent lights humming that particular frequency that marked late-night hospital emptiness. She was walking past Richard Hendricks' office when she heard his voice, sharp and cold in a way she'd never heard before. "I don't care what their discharge criteria say. We need beds freed by Friday. I don't care how." That sentence stopped her cold. But it was nothing compared to what she'd find in the files she wasn't supposed to see. The email was meant for someone else. But once she read it, there was no going back. Sabrina stood frozen outside that office door for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. The voice inside had gone quiet. Either Hendricks had ended the call or lowered his voice enough that she couldn't hear through the heavy wood. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She told herself she'd misheard, that there was context she was missing, that CEOs talked about bed management all the time, and it didn't mean anything sinister. She kept walking, dropped off her paperwork, went back to her unit. But the sentence wouldn't leave her alone. "We need beds freed by Friday. I don't care how." 3 days later, she was covering another night shift when one of the charge nurses asked her to grab a patient file from the administrative office, something about insurance pre-authorization that needed a signature. The office was empty, deserted after business hours, just the glow of computer screens left on standby, and the hum of the HVAC system pushing recycled air through the vents. Sabrina logged into the shared terminal using the charge nurse credentials she'd been given. She was looking for the Ramirez file, pre-op clearance for a cardiac procedure. She typed the name into the search bar. The wrong file opened. An email chain, marked urgent. Subject line, Q3 capacity management, action required. She should have closed it immediately. Should have found the right file and walked away. But her eyes caught on a name she recognized, Margaret Chun, the patient in 412 who was terrified of needles, the 72-year-old grandmother recovering from a stroke. And beside her name, in cold administrative language, discharge approved despite PT recommendation for additional week inpatient rehab. Family concerns overridden per RH directive. RH. Richard Hendricks. Sabrina's hands started shaking as she scrolled. There were more names. Dozens of them. Patients discharged earlier than medically advisable, against the recommendations of attending physicians, against the protests of case managers and physical therapists. And threaded through it all were emails from Hendricks, polite but unmistakable in their directive. "We need to improve our throughput metrics. Insurance reimbursement rates make extended stays financially untenable. I expect department heads to prioritize institutional sustainability." And then, buried deeper in the thread, something that made her stomach drop, medication logs. Timestamps that didn't match the nursing documentation she herself had filed. A patient who'd received morphine at 2 a.m. according to her notes, but the official record now showed 4 a.m. 2 hours later, 2 hours during which a medication error had occurred, 2 hours that had been erased and rewritten. She clicked another link. Another file. Another patient. This one had died. Sepsis from a post-surgical infection that should have been caught earlier, but wasn't because he'd been discharged 3 days ahead of schedule. The family had threatened to sue. The case had been settled quietly. The attending physician who'd objected to the early discharge had left memorial grace 2 months later. No reason given in his resignation letter. Sabrina kept digging, her breath coming faster, her hands slick with sweat on the mouse. Incident reports that had been filed and then mysteriously disappeared from the system. Staff complaints about pressure to cut corners, to rush procedures, to prioritize bed turnover over patient safety. And woven through everything, subtle and terrifying, were the threats. "Your career here ends if this goes public. I trust your loyalty to this institution." Remember that your medical license requires you to act in the hospital's best interest. She found 37 separate incidents. 37 patients whose care had been compromised, for who had died. Dozens of staff members who'd been intimidated into silence. She printed everything. 37 pages of evidence. And made the biggest mistake of her life. She confronted him directly. If you believe whistleblowers deserve protection, comment, "I stand for truth." Because what happened next proves how dangerous honesty can be. Friday night, 9:47 p.m. Empty parking garage. Just her, him, and the truth between them. Sabrina had spent 2 days working up the courage. 2 days reviewing the evidence, making copies, rehearsing what she'd say. She'd considered going to the medical board first, or the police, or a lawyer. But something in her father's training told her to try the direct approach first. Give him a chance to do the right thing, to fix this before it became a public scandal. Maybe he didn't know how bad it had gotten. Maybe he'd thank her for bringing it to his attention. She was so naive. She'd sent him an email Thursday afternoon, professional and careful. "Mr. Hendricks, I've discovered some documentation discrepancies that require your immediate attention. Can we meet privately to discuss?" He'd responded within 10 minutes. "Of course, Sabrina. Tomorrow evening, 9:45 p.m., my car in the executive parking level." Fewer interruptions there. The parking garage was nearly empty when she arrived, just a handful of vehicles belonging to night shift staff scattered across the concrete expanse. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sickly yellow pools that didn't quite reach the shadows. Her footsteps echoed too loud as she walked toward his Mercedes, the folder of printed evidence clutched against her chest like a shield. He was leaning against the driver's side door, still in his suit but with the tie loosened, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. He smiled when he saw her approach. Warm, paternal, the same smile he used at town hall meetings. "Sabrina. Thanks for being discreet about this. Come, let's talk." She stopped 6 feet away, maintaining distance. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "Mr. Hendricks, I found evidence of systematic patient care violations. Early discharges against medical advice. Altered medication records. Staff intimidation. People have died because of decisions made in your office." The smile didn't waver. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's documentation." She held up the folder. "I'm taking this to the board. People died because of your decisions." That's when his face changed. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift, like a mask slipping half an inch. The warmth drained from his eyes and left something cold and calculating in its place. "Sabrina, I think you're exhausted," he said, his voice still calm, but with an edge now, sharp as surgical steel. "You've been working doubles, dealing with difficult patients, carrying around grief about your father. Nurses crack under pressure all the time. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Don't you dare. You're seeing patterns that aren't there, making connections that don't exist. Honestly, I'm concerned about your mental state." He pushed off the car, taking a step toward her. "Why don't you give me those papers, take a few weeks of medical leave, and we'll get you the help you need." Sabrina's grip tightened on the folder. "I'm not giving you anything. And I'm not sick." "Sabrina." Another step closer. His voice dropped lower, intimate and threatening all at once. "You don't understand what you're doing. This hospital serves thousands of people. Your little crusade could destroy an institution that's been serving this community for 75 years. Is that really what you want? What I want is for you to stop killing patients." He moved fast, faster than a man his age should move. His hand shot out and grabbed the folder, yanking hard. Sabrina held on, stumbling forward, and for 3 seconds they struggled over 37 pages of evidence like children fighting over a toy. Then he shoved her. Not a push. A violent, two-handed shove that sent her flying backward into the concrete pillar behind her. Her spine hit first, then her head snapped back against the unforgiving stone. The world exploded into white light and ringing silence. She felt herself sliding down, her neck screaming as muscles and ligaments stretched and tore, the folder scattering pages across oil-stained concrete. She was on the ground when his hands found her throat. Not squeezing, not quite, just resting there, thumbs pressing against her windpipe with enough pressure to make his point. His face was close to hers now, close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath, see the fine lines around his eyes. "You'll never work in healthcare again," he whispered, calm as if he were discussing the weather. "I'll make sure of it. And accidents happen to people who can't keep their mouths shut. Do you understand me, Sabrina? Accidents happen all the time." Then he was gone, standing up, brushing off his pants, collecting the scattered pages with methodical efficiency. She tried to move, tried to speak, but her neck wouldn't cooperate and her vision was swimming with dark spots. She heard his car door close, heard the engine start, heard him drive away. She woke up in her apartment 12 hours later, neck screaming in pain, phone flooded with messages. But they weren't checking if she was okay. They were warning her to stay quiet. Because he'd already gotten ahead of the story. By Monday morning, she was the problem. The hospital PR machine moved fast. By sunrise, she was the villain. Sabrina woke up on her apartment floor Saturday afternoon, still wearing her scrubs from the night before, her phone buzzing relentlessly beside her head. For a moment, she couldn't remember why her neck felt like broken glass, why her apartment was still dark with the curtains drawn, why she was on the floor instead of in bed. Then it all came rushing back. The parking garage, his hands on her throat, the pages scattered across concrete. She reached for her phone. 43 missed calls, 67 text messages, 89 emails. The first text was from Jennifer, the charge nurse she'd worked with for 2 years. "Sabrina, I don't know what's going on, but please don't contact me anymore." The second was from Marcus, the respiratory therapist who always saved her a seat in the break room. "I can't be involved in whatever this is. I have kids." The third was from Dr. Patterson, the attending physician who'd once called her the best nurse on the floor. "Please seek help. We're all concerned about you." She scrolled through the emails with shaking hands, her neck throbbing with every movement. There was an official notification from Human Resources. Employee suspended pending investigation into serious allegations of misconduct and professional violations. You are not to enter hospital property or contact any staff members until further notice. There was a message from the hospital's legal department. "We are prepared to pursue all available remedies, including defamation claims, should you make any public statements that damage Memorial Grace Hospital's reputation." And then there were the rumors, spreading like infection through every text, every forwarded email, every whispered conversation she wasn't supposed to see. Someone had started a story that she'd been caught stealing narcotics from the medication cart. Another rumor claimed she'd been having an inappropriate relationship with a patient's husband. A third suggested she'd been making medication errors for months and was trying to blame the hospital to cover her own incompetence. The cruelest one whispered that she was mentally unstable, that grief over her father's death had finally broken something in her mind, that she was creating conspiracies where none existed. By Monday morning, the hospital had released an official statement. Memorial Grace Hospital takes all allegations seriously and maintains the highest standards of patient care and ethical conduct. We also have a responsibility to protect our dedicated staff and institution from false claims that damage reputations and undermine public trust. The employee in question has been placed on administrative leave while we conduct a thorough investigation. The statement didn't name her. It didn't have to. Everyone knew. Sabrina sat in her apartment wearing the neck brace the ER doctor had given her. The one she'd had to pay for out of pocket because she'd been too afraid to use her Memorial Grace insurance, surrounded by the evidence she'd printed. 37 pages that now seemed impossibly fragile. What did paper matter against an institution with lawyers and PR teams and 75 years of community trust? Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but some desperate part of her hoped it was someone calling to help. MS. Mitchell, this is Catherine Brennan from Hendricks Legal Group. I'm calling to inform you that if you make any public statements regarding Mr. Hendricks or Memorial Grace Hospital, you will be served with a defamation lawsuit seeking damages in excess of $2 million. Additionally, we will be filing complaints with the Texas Board of Nursing alleging professional misconduct. I trust you understand the severity of your situation. Any questions? Sabrina's voice came out as a whisper. He attacked me. That's not what the security footage shows, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Hendricks has documentation that you initiated physical contact, that he was defending himself, that your injuries were self-inflicted during what appears to have been a mental health crisis. My advice: seek psychiatric treatment, accept the generous severance package the hospital is prepared to offer, and move on with your life. Quietly, the line went dead. Sabrina sat in the silence of her apartment, staring at her father's photo on the bookshelf, Him in dress blues, her at 17, both of them smiling like the world made sense. "Dad, what do I do?" she whispered to the empty room. "You taught me to fight, but I'm completely alone." She had two choices: run and rebuild somewhere he'd never find her, or fight and risk losing everything, including her life. Most people would run. She almost did. If you've ever been punished for doing the right thing, hit that like button, because bullies like this count on silence. Don't give them that power. Sunday night, she bought a one-way ticket. Destination didn't matter. Distance did. Sabrina had spent the day in a fog of pain medication and despair, her apartment growing smaller with every hour, the walls pressing in until she couldn't breathe. The lawyer's threat played on repeat in her mind. $2 million, nursing license revoked, psychiatric evaluation, security footage that somehow showed her attacking him instead of the other way around. He'd thought of everything. He'd prepared for this. And she'd walked right into it like a child playing a game she didn't understand. By evening, the survival instinct her father had trained into her finally kicked in. She couldn't fight him from Fort Worth, but she could run, regroup, find help somewhere he couldn't reach her. She could report from anywhere. She just needed to get away from him first. She opened her laptop, hands still shaking, neck still screaming, and searched for flights. Something far. Something fast. Seattle looked good. Opposite corner of the country, big city where she could disappear, nursing jobs available. She booked the first flight out Monday morning. 7:15 a.m., nonstop, seat 23A. One way. $743 charged to a credit card that was almost maxed out. Then she started packing. One duffel bag, olive green, her father's old Navy issue. 3 days of clothes. Toiletries. The neck brace she'd have to wear for another week. Her nursing license and certifications, she'd need those to work again somewhere else. Her father's photo, the one from his promotion ceremony, still in its frame because she couldn't bear to leave it behind. And the evidence. The printed pages, now organized into a folder marked with dates and patient names. The USB drive with digital copies of everything, which she hung around her neck on a silver chain usually reserved for her father's dog tags. She deleted her social media accounts, not deactivated, deleted. Burned them to the ground so he couldn't track her movements, couldn't monitor her contacts. She closed out her streaming services, her subscriptions, anything with a digital footprint. She wrote a goodbye letter to Jennifer and Marcus and Dr. Patterson, trying to explain, trying to make them understand that she wasn't crazy, that she'd only wanted to help. But halfway through the second paragraph, she realized they wouldn't believe her, wouldn't risk their careers to listen, so she deleted the draft and never wrote it again. At 4:30 Monday morning, she called a taxi. Couldn't risk her own car. He probably had someone watching it. She waited in the darkness of her apartment with all the lights off until she saw headlights pull into the parking lot, then grabbed her bag and ran. The airport was just waking up when she arrived. Security lines still short, coffee shops just opening, that strange twilight energy of people caught between sleep and travel. Sabrina moved through it all in a haze of hypervigilance, watching every face, scanning every crowd, waiting for someone to recognize her, to stop her, to tell her she wasn't allowed to leave. Her neck brace drew stares, but no questions. Just another injured traveler. Just another person running from something. She made it through security, found her gate, sat down with her back to the wall so she could watch the entrance. 45 minutes until boarding. She'd be in Seattle by lunch. She'd find a hotel, find a lawyer, find someone who'd believe her. This wasn't over. It was just beginning somewhere else. And then she saw him. Richard Hendricks. 50 yards away. Walking toward the gate desk with a carry-on bag and a boarding pass in his hand. Her gate. Her flight. Seat somewhere in first class, probably, but the same metal tube hurtling toward Seattle at 35,000 feet. He wasn't chasing her. He was already there, which meant one of three things. Coincidence, surveillance, or something far worse. She couldn't run. She couldn't board. And she couldn't stop shaking. Sabrina sat frozen in her seat, the duffel bag clutched in her lap like a life preserver, watching Richard Hendricks move through the gate area with the easy confidence of a man who owned every space he entered. He was on his phone, laughing at something the person on the other end said, gesturing with his free hand in that animated way successful men do when they're closing deals or sharing jokes. To anyone watching, he looked like exactly what he was supposed to be, a respected hospital executive on a business trip, charming and competent and utterly harmless. But Sabrina knew better. She knew what those hands felt like around her throat. She knew what that voice sounded like when the charm dropped and the truth came out. And she knew, with a certainty that made her stomach turn to ice, that his presence on this flight was no coincidence. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe he'd hacked her email, seen the flight confirmation. Maybe he'd called in a favor with someone in IT who still had access to her accounts. Maybe he'd simply guessed. Seattle was the obvious choice, far enough away to feel like escape, big enough to disappear. Or maybe, and this was the thought that made her breath catch, maybe he'd known she'd run before she'd known it herself. Maybe he'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time, orchestrating her choices like a chess master moving pieces across a board she couldn't even see. If I board, she thought, I'm trapped at 30,000 feet with him. 6 hours in a pressurized tube with nowhere to run, no witnesses who'd believe me, no help coming if something goes wrong. He could sit behind me, beside me, near enough to whisper threats that only I can hear. He could follow me off the plane in Seattle, follow me to whatever hotel I booked, corner me in another parking garage where this time there'd be no security cameras and no one coming to check. But if I don't board, he'll know I saw him. He'll know I'm onto him. And then what? Change flights? He could too. Drive instead? He'd find me on the highway. Stay in Fort Worth? She had no apartment to go back to. She'd already given notice to her landlord, burned that bridge along with all the others. She had $700 left in her checking account, no job, no friends who'd risk helping her, and a legal threat that could destroy what little remained of her life. The gate area was filling now, families with small children staking out territory near the windows. Business travelers typing urgently on laptops, elderly couples holding hands, comfortable in the silence of decades together. Normal people on normal journeys, none of them knowing they were sharing space with a predator and his prey. That's when the Admiral walked in. He entered from the west corridor with a presence that didn't demand attention but commanded it anyway, the kind of authority that came from years of leading people through situations where mistakes meant death. Navy dress blues, perfectly maintained, the jacket carrying ribbons that told stories Sabrina's father would have recognized. Silver hair, shoulders that hadn't bowed despite what had to be at least 6 decades of gravity. He moved through the crowd with the efficiency of someone who'd spent his life in airports, found gate 47, scanned the seating area with eyes that missed nothing. And then he sat down, 2 seats away from her. Close enough that she could see the details on his uniform, the wedding ring on his left hand, the worn leather briefcase that had clearly traveled the world. Close enough that when he opened his newspaper, she caught the faint scent of Old Spice, the same aftershave her father had worn every single day of her childhood. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Her father in dress blues at her high school graduation, standing straight and proud despite the Texas heat. Her father teaching her the hand signal in their backyard, patient and serious and absolutely certain she'd never need it. Her father's voice in her head now, as clear as if he were sitting beside her. Courage isn't never being afraid, sweetheart. Courage is asking for help when you need it. She looked at the Admiral, looked at Richard Hendricks, still on his phone, still laughing. Looked at the clock on the departure board. Boarding would begin in 12 minutes. In 12 minutes, she'd either be safe or silenced. And then she remembered the signal. She sat down beside him, her hands shaking so hard she thought he'd hear her bones rattle. The Admiral didn't look up from his newspaper, Wall Street Journal, business section, reading glasses perched on his nose. But Sabrina could feel his awareness, that particular alertness military people never quite lose, even in civilian spaces. He knew she was there. He'd clocked her the moment she sat down, assessed, and categorized her without ever moving his eyes from the page. It was the same awareness her father had possessed, that constant low-level vigilance that separated predator from prey, soldier from civilian. Sabrina's hands were in her lap now, trembling so violently she had to press them together to keep them still. Her internal monologue ran in frantic loops. If he doesn't know it, I've just made myself look insane. Some crazy woman with a neck brace making weird hand gestures at a stranger in an airport. Security will remove me. Hendricks will see. And then I'll have nothing. No escape route. No plan. No hope. But if he does know the signal, and he doesn't help, if he just stands up and walks away or tells me to leave him alone, I'm dead. There's no plan B. There's no fallback. This is it. She took one breath. Two. Her father's voice in her memory. Steady, sweetheart. Fear makes you rush. Rushing makes you sloppy. Breathe first, then act. She made the gesture. Her left hand moved into position, fingers arranged in a configuration that would mean nothing to 99% of the population, but everything to someone trained to recognize it. Subtle, deliberate. A silent scream compressed into the angle of a thumb and the placement of 3 fingers. The distress signal her father had taught her in a Virginia Beach backyard 15 years ago, the one he promised only certain people would understand. The Admiral's newspaper stopped moving. It was the smallest change, just a fraction of a second pause in the rhythm of turning pages, but Sabrina saw it. His peripheral vision had caught something his conscious mind was now processing. She watched his eyes flick down, just once, confirming what he thought he'd seen. Then the newspaper lowered, slowly and deliberately, until she could see his face. His eyes were sharp, military sharp, the kind of eyes that had assessed battlefields and insurgents and life-or-death situations in the space between heartbeats. He'd seen the signal. He knew what it meant. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and calm and carrying the absolute authority of command. "I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't move. Don't speak. Not if you understand." Sabrina nodded. Tears were starting now, hot and unstoppable, spilling down her cheeks and dripping onto the neck brace she couldn't wipe away because her hands were still frozen in her lap. The Admiral stood in one smooth motion, newspaper folded and tucked under his arm, positioning himself between her and the rest of the gate area, between her and the crowd, between her and Richard Hendricks, who was still on his phone 50 yards away, oblivious or pretending to be. The Admiral's body became a wall, not aggressive, not dramatic, just an immovable presence that communicated "This woman is under my protection" to anyone trained to read such things. He pulled out his phone, dialed. His voice dropped into clipped, coded language that Sabrina recognized from her father's rare work calls. "This is Admiral Alexander, USN retired. I have a Code Victor situation at DFW Terminal A, Gate 47. Female, mid-30s, visible injuries, unable to verbally communicate threat. Need immediate airport security and law enforcement. Yes, I'll maintain position. Time is now 0637 hours. 90 seconds later, security arrived. 2 airport police officers, then 3, then a plainclothes supervisor with a radio crackling on his belt. They approached with practiced efficiency, scanning the gate area for threats, eyes landing on the Admiral first, recognizing rank even in civilian space, then following his subtle head tilt towards Sabrina. That's when Richard Hendricks looked up from his phone. Sabrina watched it happen in slow motion. His eyes found the security cluster, found the Admiral standing guard, found her sitting behind that human shield, tears streaming, evidence USB drive visible around her neck. For one split second, his mask slipped completely. No charm, no pretense, just cold calculation and something that looked almost like satisfaction. The CEO looked up from his phone and saw the security team. His eyes locked onto hers. And in that split second, she saw something that confirmed her worst fear. He'd planned this entire encounter. He wasn't running from security. He was walking toward her. If you believe predators shouldn't win, comment "Justice matters," because what happens in the next 5 minutes will determine if evil gets away with it. He walked toward her with the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences. That was about to change. Richard Hendricks moved through the gate area like he owned it, his expression transforming into perfect concern. Eyebrows drawn together, mouth set in that practiced combination of worry and relief that people use at hospital bedsides and accident scenes. He was playing to an audience now, and he knew exactly which role to perform. The caring boss, the concerned mentor, the reasonable man dealing with an unstable employee. "Sabrina, thank God you're okay." His voice carried across the gate area, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, warm enough to sound genuine. "We've been so worried about you. After your accident, the stress you've been under, we didn't know where you'd gone." The Admiral stepped forward, placing himself directly in Hendricks' path. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just an immovable object appearing precisely where it needed to be. His voice, when he spoke, carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "Sir, this woman has signaled for emergency assistance. Step back." Hendricks stopped, his smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before reassembling itself. I appreciate your concern, but this is a private medical matter. I'm her employer. I'm the CEO of Memorial Grace Hospital, and she's been going through a very difficult time. I'm just trying to help. Sir, step back. The mask was slipping now. Hendricks' jaw tightened, his eyes going cold even as his voice stayed measured. This is completely unnecessary. She's clearly in crisis. She needs psychiatric evaluation, not security theater. I have legal responsibility for her welfare as her employer. Sabrina's voice cut through the tension, raw and shaking but audible. You attacked me. The gate area went silent. 50 people who'd been absorbed in their phones and coffee and pre-flight rituals suddenly paying attention. Heads turning. Phones coming up, not even pretending not to record now, just brazenly filming because this was clearly something worth capturing. You attacked me in the parking garage, Sabrina continued, standing now, the Admiral still positioned protectively between them. Her hand went to the USB drive around her neck. You threatened me because I found evidence of patient care violations. People died because of your decisions, and when I tried to report it, you assaulted me. And I have proof. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones everywhere now, a dozen cameras at least, capturing every word, every expression, every second of a powerful man's careful facade beginning to crack. Hendricks pivoted immediately, his voice shifting from concern to indignant. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Paranoid delusions, false accusations, complete fabrication. I'll be filing a defamation lawsuit before the end of the day. This is slander, recorded by multiple witnesses, and I will not tolerate. Then explain the neck brace. The Admiral interrupted, his tone conversational, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. Explain why she made a distress signal used by people who can't safely speak. Explain why she's terrified of a man who claims to be helping her. Airport police were arriving now, not just security, but actual Fort Worth PD, called in by whatever protocol the Admiral's code had triggered. A sergeant approached, taking in the scene with practiced assessment. Military officer, injured woman, well-dressed man whose body language screamed lawyer up even as his mouth kept insisting everything was fine. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the witness, the sergeant said to Hendricks, his hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. Not threatening, just ready. Witness. Witness to what? This is a mentally unstable employee making false accusations against. Sir, step away. Now. Hendricks finally moved back, his hands up in that universal gesture of compliance, but his eyes were locked on Sabrina with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was calculating, planning, already 3 moves ahead in whatever game he was playing. The sergeant turned to Sabrina. Ma'am, can you tell me what's happening here? Sabrina's hand closed around the USB drive. I'm a nurse at Memorial Grace Hospital. 3 weeks ago, I discovered evidence that our CEO was pressuring staff to discharge patients early despite medical risk, altering medication records to cover up complications, and threatening employees who objected. When I confronted him with documentation, he attacked me in the hospital parking garage. I have the evidence on this drive, patient records, emails, altered logs, everything. And I have witnesses who'll confirm the pattern of intimidation. She's lying, Hendricks said immediately. I have security footage that shows. Then you'll show it to investigators, the sergeant interrupted, along with any other documentation you want to provide. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me to give a formal statement. Admiral, I assume you witnessed the distress signal? I did, and I'll provide whatever testimony is required. The airport security office became an interrogation room. And within 20 minutes, 3 more hospital employees were on the phone, ready to talk. Once the first person spoke, the dam broke. Turns out, she wasn't the only one he'd silenced. Sabrina sat in the airport security office with the Admiral standing quietly in the corner like a sentinel, watching as her entire world shifted on its axis. The sergeant had her USB drive now, plugged into a laptop, scrolling through files with increasingly grim expressions. A detective from the Fort Worth PD Major Crimes Unit had arrived within 30 minutes, followed by a representative from the Texas Medical Board. Then an FBI agent whose presence suggested this had escalated beyond local jurisdiction into federal territory. But it was the phone calls that changed everything. The first came from Jennifer, the charge nurse who'd told Sabrina never to contact her again. Her voice on speakerphone was shaking. I saw the video. Someone posted it on Twitter. Sabrina, I'm so sorry. I was scared. We were all scared. But I have documentation too. Text messages from Hendricks pressuring me to discharge patients before they were stable. I saved everything because I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know what to do with it. The second call came 12 minutes later. Marcus, the respiratory therapist. I witnessed him threaten Dr. Patterson. Told him his contract wouldn't be renewed if he kept objecting to early discharges. I heard the whole conversation through the office door. I'll testify. I should have testified before. I'm sorry. Then came Dr. Patricia Nguyen, the pharmacist who'd worked at Memorial Grace for 14 years. He ordered me to backdate medication logs after a patient coded. Said it was to protect the hospital from litigation, but I knew it was to hide the fact that we'd discharged someone still on 4 antibiotics. I have the original logs. I made copies before I changed the system. Within 2 hours, 7 hospital employees had come forward, each one with their own piece of the pattern, each one carrying guilt for staying silent, relief for finally speaking, and fury at a system that had made them choose between their conscience and their careers. The stories aligned with devastating precision. Pressure to increase patient throughput regardless of medical readiness. Medication errors covered up through altered documentation. Incident reports that disappeared from the filing system. Staff members who raised concerns suddenly finding themselves written up for minor infractions, passed over for promotions, or quietly terminated during restructuring. And woven through it all was Richard Hendricks, charming in public, ruthless in private, always careful to leave himself plausible deniability while his directives destroyed lives. But the evidence went deeper than patient care violations. A forensic accountant brought in by the FBI started tracing billing records and found something that made federal charges inevitable: systemic insurance fraud. Patients discharged early but billed for full stays. Procedures coded at higher reimbursement levels than actually performed. Medicaid billing for services never rendered. Over 18 months, Memorial Grace Hospital had fraudulently collected an estimated $4.7 million. And the financial trail led directly to performance bonuses tied to Richard Hendricks' directives. By noon, news vans were parked outside Memorial Grace Hospital. By 2 p.m., the hospital board had called an emergency meeting. By 4 p.m., Hendricks' lawyer had arrived at the airport. Expensive suit, leather briefcase, the kind of attorney who charged $1,000 an hour to make problems disappear. He was 6 hours too late. The media coverage spread like wildfire. Local news first. Memorial Grace Hospital CEO accused of patient care violations and fraud. Then regional. Whistleblower nurse exposes systematic medical misconduct. Then national. Hospital CEO arrested following dramatic airport confrontation. The video from the gate area had gone viral. Millions of views in hours. Showing the moment Sabrina's voice cut through Hendricks' performance. The moment truth became undeniable. The arrest happened at 6:17 p.m. in the airport security office. Federal charges: healthcare fraud, conspiracy to defraud Medicare and Medicaid, obstruction of justice. State charges: assault, witness intimidation, criminal tampering with government records. The FBI agent read him his rights while airport police secured his hands behind his back with steel handcuffs that clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the small room. They walked him out through the terminal, past the gate areas, past the restaurants and shops, past hundreds of travelers who stopped and stared and pulled out their phones to capture the perp walk of a man who'd spent his career projecting authority and respectability. His head was down. His expensive suit was rumpled. The mask was completely gone now, leaving only a middle-aged man who'd gambled everything on silence and lost. Sabrina watched from behind a glass partition, the Admiral still beside her, as they loaded Richard Hendricks into a police vehicle and drove him away from the airport, away from his corner office, away from the power he'd wielded like a weapon against people who'd only wanted to help others. The man who told her she'd never work in healthcare again was now the one whose career was over. But the story doesn't end with his downfall. It ends with what she did next. She never boarded that flight. But she didn't go home, either. Sabrina stood at the terminal window long after the police vehicle disappeared from view, watching planes taxi and lift into the gray Dallas sky. Her Seattle flight had departed without her. Seat 23A empty, destination abandoned. The duffel bag sat at her feet, still packed with 3 days of clothes and a lifetime of running away. She could rebook. She could still disappear into some distant city and start over with a new name and a quiet job where nobody knew what she'd done. The option was still there, tempting in its simplicity. But something had changed in that security office. Something had shifted when Jennifer's voice came through the speakerphone saying, "I'm sorry," and Marcus admitted, "I should have testified before." She'd thought she was alone. She'd believed the isolation was permanent, that speaking truth meant losing everything. But 7 people had stepped forward. 7 people had found their courage because she'd found hers first. Running suddenly felt like betrayal. The Admiral approached, his footsteps measured and deliberate. He extended his hand, a formal gesture, military precision even in civilian farewell. "Ms. Mitchell, it's been an honor." Sabrina shook his hand, her throat tight. "Thank you. You saved my life." "No, ma'am. You saved your own life. You knew the signal. You had the courage to use it. I just did what any decent person would do." He paused, his eyes serious. "Your father would be proud. That signal saved your life, and probably dozens of others who'll never know your name." He released her hand, picked up his briefcase, and walked toward his rescheduled flight. Sabrina watched him go. Another soldier disappearing into the crowd, carrying quiet honor like her father had, proving that courage still existed in a world that often felt too broken to fix. She pulled out her phone, found a number she deleted but still remembered. A hospital board member who'd stayed conspicuously silent during her suspension, a woman who'd served on Memorial Grace's board for 12 years and claimed to care about patient welfare right up until caring became inconvenient. Sabrina dialed. The woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. "Sabrina? Mrs. Patterson, I'm not running. I'm staying in Fort Worth, and I'm going to make sure this never happens again. You can help me fix the system, or you can explain to the media why you knew and did nothing. Your choice." The silence on the other end lasted 5 seconds. "Then, what do you need?" 3 weeks later, Sabrina testified before the Texas Medical Board. Not as a defendant, but as an expert witness in a systemic investigation of hospital governance failures. She spoke for 2 hours, walking the board through every piece of evidence, every pattern of intimidation, every policy that had prioritized profit over patients. Her testimony was calm, factual, devastating. It triggered reforms that would eventually spread to 47 states. The criminal trial took 9 months. Richard Hendrick's legal team fought hard. Character witnesses, procedural challenges, attempts to discredit Sabrina's mental state and professional competence. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the witnesses kept coming. In the end, the jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison, with additional state sentences to run consecutively. No early parole. No house arrest. No special treatment for a man who'd spent his career believing consequences were for other people. The civil suits came next. Families of patients who died or suffered because of early discharges, altered records, covered up complications. Memorial Grace Hospital settled most of them, payouts totaling $16 million, funded by insurance and the sale of assets. The hospital itself survived, barely, under new leadership and strict oversight. Some of the families wanted Sabrina to testify against the institution she'd worked for. She did. Because accountability mattered more than loyalty to a broken system. But Sabrina didn't go back to Memorial Grace. She couldn't. Too many ghosts in those hallways. Too many memories of who she'd been before everything changed. Instead, she took a position at a smaller hospital across town, Methodist Regional, a facility known for patient-centered care and transparent governance. Not as a floor nurse, but as a patient advocate, a newly created role designed specifically for her. Her job was to be the voice that couldn't be silenced, the person staff could come to when something felt wrong, the check against any administrator who might value metrics over lives. Some of her former colleagues reached out. Jennifer sent flowers with a note. "I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner." Marcus visited her new office, brought coffee, sat in uncomfortable silence before finally saying, "You're the bravest person I know. Dr. Patterson wrote her a recommendation letter so glowing it made her cry. Others never contacted her, never apologized, never acknowledged their silence. Sabrina forgave them anyway, not because they deserved it, but because carrying anger was exhausting, and she had more important work to do. She kept her father's photo on her desk, not as a reminder of what she'd lost, but what she became because of what he taught her. Courage isn't loud. It's a hand signal in a crowded airport. It's a USB drive you refuse to destroy. It's sitting beside a stranger and betting your life that honor still exists. 5 years have passed since that Monday morning at Gate 47. 5 years since Sabrina Mitchell made a choice between silence and truth, between running and standing, between saving herself and saving everyone who'd come after. The world has moved on the way it always does. New headlines replacing old ones, new scandals burying previous outrages, the relentless churn of crisis and resolution that makes yesterday's courage feel like ancient history. But some ripples never stop spreading. Richard Hendricks is in his 4th year at Federal Correctional Institution Bastrop, a medium-security prison about 3 hours south of Fort Worth. He'll be eligible for parole in 18 months, though early release seems unlikely given his complete refusal to accept responsibility for his actions. In prison interviews, carefully stage-managed through his lawyers, he still maintains he was a visionary leader destroyed by a vindictive employee and an overzealous prosecution. He's written a book about his experience, self-published because no legitimate press would touch it, titled Conviction Without Crime: How Corporate Medicine Became Criminalized. It sold 73 copies, mostly to conspiracy theorists and people fascinated by the psychology of unrepentant criminals. His victims don't think about him much anymore. They've moved on to grief and healing and the slow work of rebuilding trust in a healthcare system that failed them. For families whose loved ones died because of his decisions have established a foundation in their names, the Memorial Grace Patient Safety Foundation, that advocates for transparency in hospital governance and provides legal support to healthcare whistleblowers. Sabrina sits on the board. She attends every meeting. Memorial Grace Hospital survived, but barely. The board of directors was completely replaced. 3 administrators resigned rather than face investigation. The hospital paid out those $16 million in civil settlements, sold 2 satellite clinics to stay solvent, and spent 18 months under federal oversight while implementing new patient safety protocols. The culture changed slowly, painfully, the way institutional culture always changes, through attrition and replacement, through younger staff who never knew the old way, through policies written in the blood of people who deserved better. But Sabrina's impact reached far beyond one hospital in Fort Worth, Texas. Her testimony before the Texas Medical Board triggered a comprehensive review of hospital governance structures across the state. That review revealed patterns similar to what she'd uncovered, not as extreme, not as criminal, but the same basic incentive structure that prioritized financial metrics over patient outcomes, that rewarded administrators for efficiency, even when efficiency meant cutting corners on care. The board implemented new regulations, mandatory reporting systems for staff concerns, protection against retaliation for whistleblowers, independent patient safety committees with authority to override administrative decisions, and criminal liability for executives who deliberately endanger patients for profit. Texas wasn't alone. Within 2 years, 47 states had passed some version of enhanced whistleblower protection for healthcare workers, inspired directly by Sabrina's case. The federal government updated Medicare and Medicaid regulations to require participating hospitals to maintain independent reporting systems. Medical schools added ethics training focused on the moral courage required to speak up when institutions fail. Nursing programs teach Sabrina's story as a case study in professional responsibility. She didn't set out to change policy. She just wanted to stop people from dying. But courage has a way of spreading like light through cracks in darkness, reaching places the original source never intended, illuminating corners that had been shadow for so long people forgot they were supposed to be visible. Sabrina still works at Methodist Regional Hospital, still serving as their patient advocate, though her role has expanded over the years. She speaks at nursing conferences now, teaching young healthcare workers how to recognize the early warning signs of institutional corruption, how to document concerns properly, how to protect themselves while protecting patients. She's not comfortable with public speaking, still gets nervous before every presentation, still has to remind herself to breathe, but she does it anyway because the alternative is silence, and silence is what predators count on. She mentors young nurses, particularly the ones who remind her of herself at 25, idealistic, passionate, terrified of failing the people who trust them with their lives. One afternoon, a 23-year-old new graduate named Maria came to her office, shaking and close to tears, saying she'd witnessed an attending physician dismiss a patient's chest pain complaints as anxiety without running proper cardiac tests. Sabrina listened, took notes, helped Maria file the proper reports through the correct channels, and stood beside her when the hospital investigated and ultimately vindicated her concerns. The patient was readmitted, diagnosed with an impending heart attack, and received a stent that probably saved his life. After it was over, Maria asked the question Sabrina had been waiting for. How do you do this? How do you keep fighting when it's so hard and people hate you for it? Sabrina pulled out a photo from her desk drawer, her father in dress blues, her at 17, both of them squinting into Virginia Beach sunshine. My father taught me something, she said. He taught me that courage isn't a feeling. It's a decision you make when you're most afraid. And he taught me a signal, a way to ask for help when speaking feels impossible. She showed Maria the hand gesture, explained what it meant, where it came from, why it mattered. I hope you never need it, Sabrina said, echoing her father's words from 15 years earlier. But if you do, I need to know you'll use it. Promise me. Maria promised. Sabrina has taught that signal to 47 nurses now, along with doctors, pharmacists, social workers, anyone who might find themselves in a position where truth becomes dangerous. She's created an underground railroad of courage, a network of people who know that honor still exists and help is possible if you know how to ask. The Admiral, Rear Admiral James Alexander, USN retired, never boarded his flight to Seattle that day either. He rescheduled, spent the week in Fort Worth providing testimony, and somehow never quite left Sabrina's life after that. They meet for coffee every few months, an unlikely friendship forged in crisis and sustained by mutual respect. He's introduced her to veteran advocacy groups, helped her navigate the military healthcare system to provide better care for former service members, and become something like the father figure she lost. Not a replacement, never that, but a reminder that her father's values still live in the world through people who carry them forward. Last Veterans Day, they appeared together at a memorial service at the Fort Worth VA hospital. Sabrina spoke about her father's service, about the lessons he'd taught her, about the signal that saved her life. The Admiral stood beside her, quiet and dignified, and when she finished speaking, he offered her a slow, deliberate nod, the kind of acknowledgement one warrior gives another when words are insufficient. The families of the patients who died because of Richard Hendrick's decisions, Sabrina knows most of them now. Mrs. Chen's daughter, whose mother never fully recovered from being discharged too early from stroke rehabilitation. The Martinez family, whose father's post-surgical infection went undetected because he was sent home 3 days ahead of schedule. The Johnsons, whose teenage son's medication error was covered up until it was too late to intervene. They don't blame Sabrina for not speaking up sooner. They thank her for speaking up at all. Several have told her that knowing someone finally held the system accountable, that their loved one's death meant something in the end, that changes were made so others might be spared. It doesn't erase the loss, but it transforms it from meaningless tragedy into catalyst for justice. Sabrina carries their grief like a weight she'll never put down. But she also carries their gratitude, their forgiveness, their insistence that she did more than most people would have done. That courage delayed is still courage. On hard days, and there are many, she remembers that she didn't save herself. She saved everyone who comes after. The young nurse who won't be pressured into discharging a patient too early because new policies protect her from retaliation. The doctor who reports a colleague's impairment because whistleblower protections mean his career won't be destroyed for doing the right thing. The pharmacist who refuses to backdate a medication log because criminal liability for such actions is now clear and enforced. The patients who receive the care they need instead of the care that maximizes profit, who live because a system was forced to change, who never know Sabrina Mitchell's name but benefit from her refusal to stay silent. This is the mathematics of courage. 1 person speaks, 7 find their voices, reforms spread to 47 states, and thousands of lives are saved by people who never meet, never know each other's names, but are connected by the invisible thread of someone who decided that truth mattered more than safety. Sabrina's apartment, a small 2-bedroom she moved into after everything happened, has become a shrine to this ongoing work. One wall is covered with thank you notes from patients, from families, from nurses she's mentored. Another holds her father's military commendations, his flag from the funeral, photos from his service. Her desk, where she works on advocacy materials late into the night, holds the framed photo that started it all. Her and her father, 17 and alive, and certain the world made sense. She's 38 now, still single, though she's dated occasionally. A teacher she met at a coffee shop, a physical therapist from the hospital, a software engineer who didn't understand why she woke up with nightmares sometimes, but tried his best to be patient. None of them lasted. Not because they weren't good men, but because Sabrina's life has a center of gravity that pulls everything toward purpose over comfort, toward justice over peace. Maybe someday she'll find someone who understands that. Maybe she won't. Either way, she's learned she can be whole without being part of a pair. She's also learned that trauma doesn't disappear just because you did the right thing. Therapy has helped. 2 years of weekly sessions with a psychologist who specializes in workplace trauma and moral injury. The nightmares are less frequent now. The hypervigilance has faded to manageable levels. She can walk through parking garages without her heart rate spiking. She can see men in expensive suits without her hands starting to shake. Healing, she's discovered, isn't a destination but a direction. You keep moving toward it even when you never quite arrive. The neck brace came off after 6 weeks. The physical injuries healed faster than the psychological ones, the way they always do. She still has pain sometimes, especially when weather changes or she's stressed, that dull ache at the base of her skull that reminds her of concrete pillars and hands on her throat. But the pain has become a tether to reality, proof that she survived, evidence that she's still here doing the work that matters. She's been asked to write a book about her experience. 3 publishers have reached out, offering advances that would change her financial situation significantly. She's declined all of them, not because the story shouldn't be told, but because she's not ready to reduce 5 years of grief and growth and ongoing work to a commodity, to a narrative arc that ends neatly with lessons learned and wisdom gained. Her story isn't over. The work isn't finished, and some things are too sacred to sell, but she does tell the story. In conference halls and hospital break rooms, in mentoring sessions and advocacy meetings, in quiet conversations with young nurses who are scared and need to know that speaking up is possible. She tells it not as a hero's journey, but as a human one, full of mistakes and fear and moments where she almost gave up, where she wanted to board that flight to Seattle and never look back. She tells it honestly because the sanitized version, the version where courage comes easy and justice is swift, doesn't help anyone. The messy truth, the version where doing the right thing costs everything and takes years to matter. That's the version that gives permission for the next person to try. Last month, a nurse from a hospital in Phoenix called her. A woman she'd never met, who'd heard her speak at a conference, who was facing her own version of Sabrina's nightmare. A surgical unit cutting corners to meet throughput metrics, a supervisor pressuring staff to falsify documentation, threats when she tried to report. The woman was terrified, isolated, considering just quitting and walking away. Sabrina talked to her for 2 hours, walked her through the documentation process, connected her with legal resources, reminded her that she wasn't alone. 2 weeks ago, that Phoenix hospital started its own investigation. Changes are happening there too, ripples spreading from ripples, courage multiplying through connection. This is what Sabrina's life looks like now. Not dramatic confrontations in airports, but steady work in the ordinary spaces where systems either serve people or fail them. Not headlines, but incremental progress. Not fame, but purpose. She wakes up each morning in her small apartment, makes coffee, looks at her father's photo, and chooses again to be the person he raised her to be. Some days that choice feels heroic. Most days it just feels necessary. The signal her father taught her, that subtle hand gesture that saved her life, has taken on a second meaning in her mind. It's not just a distress call anymore. It's a reminder that help exists if you know how to ask, that honor still lives in the world through people who recognize it when they see it, that you're never as alone as fear tells you that you are. When she teaches it to young nurses now, she tells them this. You might never need it. I hope you never need it. But knowing it exists changes how you move through the world. It means somewhere, someone is paying attention. Somewhere, someone will help. You just have to be brave enough to ask. And if they do need it, if they find themselves in that terrible position where truth becomes dangerous and speaking up feels impossible, Sabrina's phone number is in their contacts. She answers every call, every single one. At 3 in the morning, or during dinner, or in the middle of patient rounds, she answers. Because someone answered for her when she made that signal in gate 47. And paying that debt forward is the only way to honor what it cost. If you believe one person can change everything, subscribe to this channel, because we tell stories of people who refuse to stay silent. Comment, "Courage is contagious," if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that speaking up matters. And if you ever see that signal, remember, someone's life might depend on you recognizing it. Hit that like button if you stand against corruption. Subscribe if you want more stories of justice served. Share this with someone who's ever felt powerless, because this nurse proved that courage doesn't need permission. It just needs one moment of truth. Sabrina Mitchell didn't set out to be extraordinary. She just refused to be complicit. She didn't have special training or unique advantages. She just had a father who taught her that honor matters, in a moment where she had to choose between comfort and conscience. She chose conscience, and that choice rippled outward in ways she never imagined, touching lives she'll never meet, saving people who'll never know her name, changing a system that believed it was too big to change. This is what courage looks like in real life. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, just persistent. Just someone deciding that truth matters more than safety, that other people's lives matter more than their own comfort, that the world might be broken, but it's worth trying to fix anyway. She keeps her father's photo on her desk, not as a reminder of what she lost, but what she became because of what he taught her. And sometimes, late at night when the hospital is quiet and her work is done, she looks at that photo and whispers the same words the Admiral said to her 5 years ago in that airport terminal. "You'd be proud, Dad. The signal worked. And I'm still fighting." Because courage isn't something you have. It's something you do. Again and again and again. In airport terminals and hospital hallways. In small choices and desperate moments. In the space between fear and action, where character is formed and futures are written. Sabrina Mitchell made that choice. And because she did, thousands of others have made it too. The dominoes keep falling, justice keeps spreading, and somewhere right now, someone is finding the courage to speak up because a nurse in Fort Worth proved it was possible. That's how you change the world. Not all at once. Not with grand gestures. But one moment of truth at a time, one person at a time, one hand signal in a crowded airport that reminds us all that honor still exists if we're brave enough to recognize it. The story doesn't end here. It never really ends. It just keeps spreading, one ripple at a time, until courage becomes contagious and silence is no longer an option, and people remember that they're not powerless after all. They just needed someone to show them how it's done. Sabrina Mitchell showed them. And the world is better because she did.